All right. I think we're live now. So, hello, everybody. Joanna here. Welcome to our Lions of Al-RASSAN discussion. This is a wonderful standalone by Guy Gavriel K. And I am so happy to have these wonderful guests here with me. So, I'll start over to my right, which is Laura from Fantasy Awash. Hi, Laura. How about tell us a little bit about your channel, since I'm not sure. I know you're fairly new to BookTube, right?
I
So
am,
tell
yeah.
us a little bit.
I'm of the 2023 group, so still fairly new. Read mostly fantasy, despite having my background in classical history. So I like historical fiction as well, but can also find historical fiction quite frustrating because of that fact, if things get too wrong. So I try not to read too much classical historical fiction, but I love stuff like GGK. So this is a good fit for me.
Perfect. Have you read any GGK before?
It's my first one. I got it for my husband for Christmas, and he declared that it was one of his top 2 favorite fantasy books of all time. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to read it. And then I was pressuring everyone into a buddy read, and here we are.
Yay!
I appreciate it.
Yes, it worked out perfectly. So I'm so glad that we got to read it alongside each other and that we're going to get to discuss it. And the person that I can credit for my starting with this particular book when it comes to Guy Gavriel K is none other than Jake Bishop, who's done a lot of Guy Gavriel K content on his channel, but has also talked in a video about a guide and where to start, and highly recommended starting here and not Tigana. So,
You can
Jake,
start with
welcome.
Tigana.
Well, I know you said you
Yes.
can, but
Yes, so I'm Jake. Have spearheaded the Guy Gavriel K propaganda machine on BookTube for the last couple of years. I first read Tigana in 2021, and then I read this also in 2021, and then started going through and have now read all of his books. And one of my favorite videos that I have made is Where to Start Guy Gavriel K, where I have in order, like the ones that I think have the most pros and cons to start. And the one that I think is the best place to start for the most people is the Lions of Al-RASSAN. If you don't want to start with the Lions of Al-RASSAN, there's I think 8 places that I would describe as a good place to start, and Tigana is one of them. But I think Lions is overall the pick that, at the start of the video, I'm like, if you don't want to have to watch a 30-minute video and decide, and you just want me to pick for you, go read the Lions of Al-RASSAN. It's the combination of, it's very similar to a lot of his other works. So I think this is the main advantage it has over Tigana. I think it's a better predictor for whether you will like his other books. I think it's a lot more likely for someone to like the Lions of Al-RASSAN, or it's a lot. It would be weird to really like the Lions of Al-RASSAN and then not like his other books. But also it would be weird to not like the Lions of Al-RASSAN and then like most of his other books. And it would be it would be less confusing if someone read Tigana and loved it and then didn't love the other stuff, or if someone didn't like Tigana and then did love the other stuff. It's also just really good. That's one of the other things in its favor.
it really is.
For starting with it. And then also there are some, as the final third consideration, that's like a very minor thing. Some of his novels have very, very, very small connections, and just this makes sense from the order there because it's first in publication order.
Yeah, beautifully said. And I'm really glad I took your advice, although part of me did question it a little bit because I thought, wow, this book is absolutely brilliant. And then I kept hearing people say it was their favorite Guy Gavriel K book. And it made me a little nervous, like thinking, oh no, are all the other ones going to pale in comparison to this?
So I would say if you make a review of any Guy Gavriel K book and really love it, there will be people being like, this is my favorite Guy Gavriel K book, with the possible exception of Fiona Var and Isabel. But Lions is one of my favorite Guy Gavriel K books. It's probably my third favorite. But I think even if Lions ends up being your favorite, there are multiple other Guy Gavriel K books that will be in the same category.
Yeah.
Arbonne is also a really good pick, Matt.
Oh, yeah. I was assured about that too, because I got a lot. I did do a spoiler-free review of this book, and I did get a lot of comments of people talking about how it was their favorite, but also said that they love all of his books and they recommend just reading everything. And Song for Arbonne, I don't know, is it Arbonne? I guess I'll figure out that pronunciation later.
Arbonne, but
yeah, I am going to be,
but I think you would tend to err on Arbonne just because Spanish.
Yeah, I think it's Arbonne. I think it's Arbonne too.
Arbonne is based on France.
Yeah,
it's
then Arbonne would be how you would say it.
Yeah. That's all right. Well, yeah, I'm really excited to get to that one. And speaking of, well, actually, that one's related to music, and that's a good transition to talk with my other guest that's here, and that is Josh from Red Fairy Books. So, Josh, welcome back to the channel. What was your experience reading The Lions of Al-RASSAN spoiler free?
Oh, so this was a book, I mean, in many ways, I think written for me and my tastes, because my two favorite genres are fantasy and historical fiction. And this was a perfect marriage of the two. Although we can talk about it. It feels a little bit more historical than fantasy because fantasy elements are played down so much. But beyond that, things that I loved most, I loved his writing. I loved how subtle he was with everything, whether it was character creation or even important plot points. And there was just such finesse in everything that he did. I think, Joanna, you might actually use that word in your review as well, that's the thing that blew me away. I think sometimes I feel like modern authors, especially, often I think they try too hard and they use too much hyperbole and they spoon feed too much to their readers and they just kind of overdo it. And this was just a master class for me in just a subtle use of the English language. I loved absolutely everything about this book.
Yes, I totally agree about the prose. His prose just it felt so effortless. I felt like there was a confidence behind it and yeah, a level of sophistication without feeling dense or forced. So I thoroughly enjoyed his writing style. Jake and Laura, do you want to add anything to Guy Gavriel Kay's writing style? Actually, before I get to that, let's see. What did Evie say, Jake? Am I included in most people, or do you still think I should start with A Brightness Long Ago for the maximum horse
Yes, I'm
content?
recommending you start with A Brightness Long Ago based on maximum amount of horse-related content per page. Okay.
All right. So we do have some tailored recommendations when it comes to
Yes.
that Gabrielle Kay.
Yes. You really you can't go wrong there's only a few places you can go wrong. Basically, just there's two series. Don't start with one of the ones that's not book one in those series. Don't start with River of Stars and don't start with All the Seas of the World or Jezebel. There you go. Start somewhere other than there for the one that sounds good to you. But again, I think if you are unsure, you cannot go wrong with Lions. It's my default recommendation.
I think Bridger, Library Ladder, I think he said Lions and Song for Our Bun, or however
He
we're going to say it.
Song for Our Bun as well.
Yeah, I think those were the two that he mentioned as well. So
yeah, I mean, I'm not going to fight Mac on it because I'm just going to be like, okay, sure.
Yeah. Yes, we're going to be definitely talking about Elseed in a little bit, but yes, there's definitely some powerful historical references in this book. But going off again on the prose, so I wanted to hear Laura and Jake's thoughts about Guy Gavriel Kay's prose.
So I am not a prose snob. I appreciate very good prose, but I mean, I've read a ton of Sanderson this year, so I don't think I can sit here on a pedestal and be like, oh, I really am into prose. I appreciate very good prose, and definitely felt while reading this that his writing is just pretty. I love the use of similes in his writing. As I said, classical history is my thing, so similes are very much a part of my study. I love his use of the English language. I think, as Josh said, it's so beautiful that it almost sounds melodic at times. And because poetry is a part of the story, that it fits so well. And his writing to me, if I were to describe it to someone, I'm like, it's just pretty beautiful writing, which sounds ridiculous, but until you read it, it kind of makes sense when you start reading it, that it is just beautiful writing.
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of prose, I'm generally, I say for prose, usually it doesn't have a huge impact on my enjoyment of a novel unless it's really, really good or straight up bad, which usually straight up bad just doesn't get published. So that doesn't come up very often. That being said, of all the writer's prose, in terms of my favorite, Guy Gavriel Kay is top 2 and he's not second. I love the way the man writes, the way everything flows together so smoothly, so richly. He just gives things a sense of makes it feel wow, this is really important and really huge and really subtle. Yeah, I don't know. He just makes it work. It's incredibly immersive. I think extremely efficient in like setting scenes and letting me picture things. Like he doesn't often spend like, oh, I'm now going to take like 2 paragraphs describing things. He does have sections of descriptive paragraphs. He just like slips in the descriptions with the other stuff very naturally. Often he gets very like inventive, like with his prose. He'll have like, you know, long compound sentences with like brackets in there, and it shouldn't work. Like it should be clunky, but then I read it and it's just like totally smooth and it doesn't make sense. So I can't speak highly enough on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because looking at it on a more macro level, I also just appreciated the structure of this story, which I found also had a very organic flow to it, not a very typical streamlined structure towards like a specific goal at the end. You could even say that it was slightly episodic, but not in a bad way. And I thought that he just mastered that. Like it still had a flow to it. It still came together. There were still elements of foreshadowing. What did you all think of the structure of this book, though? We'll start with Josh this time, since
I loved, and this is still spoiler free, but the denouement is done so differently than maybe anybody else would do it. And I thought it was perfect. And I was so, I don't know why I was surprised by the way he got to that point and what happened at that point. And I really enjoyed that. Another thing that was interesting for me as far as just prose and structure is, you know, it's multi POV, and I loved basically the top 4 POV characters. And every time he went to a different character, initially, like it ruffled my feathers because I wanted to stay. I love these 4 characters so much. But then by the time we got to the end of the POV, I realized, oh, he had to do that because it's going to lead into this. And it always just made total sense for me. So again, another thing, I think structurally, just home run. Absolutely.
yeah, that's so well said. And I thought that was interesting the way he did multi POV too, because I think you said this in your review, Jake, about how it felt like he went between limited third person and omniscient. And I noticed that too. I noticed that there were sections where it felt like we were head hopping a little bit, but then we were mostly zoomed in on a certain perspective. And it was just an interesting choice. And it's like so many things, like you were saying about the compound sentences, like this shouldn't work, but it does. So, yeah, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, he just does whatever he wants, basically. He's
Yeah.
just like, oh, there's this scene. We're just gonna write this scene as if like there was an omniscient narrator who was telling the story. Oh, this next scene, we're gonna just write this scene like it's someone recounting a story from their past. Oh, this scene, this one's gonna be present tense because I said so, and it's just gonna be like super deep in the person's head. He does this for all his books. Like he has ones where he'll like have a present tense scene just to give it a different feel because he's like, I just want it to have this feel. And structurally, I describe it as like it doesn't really have like the standard like rising action,
Mhm.
climax, falling action. It's like it starts with an event and then has a falling action for that event, and then kind of does it. And I think some people, when people do struggle with lions, it's usually because it's unclear like what the goal is, like what these people are trying to accomplish. This is for people if I'm like, if you think this is going to be the problem, this is the only time I'd be like, maybe do like Arbonne or Tigana. Tigana or Arbonne, it's a lot more like, hey, this is what like our main group of people are trying to accomplish. Well, a lot of the tension building in Lions is like you can sense that the future conflict will come up because of like the situation of the world that these are putting them in. So it's like as the people start interacting more and you get attached to them, it like it kind of grows the tension and like you get uneasy over time because like it just can't like last this long. So yeah, it's structurally I think pretty unique. I love it, but it's one of the only like usually when people don't like the lines of AL-RASSAN, it's why. But I also wouldn't want him to have changed it because I loved it, and that's tough. So
Yeah. No, I totally understand what you mean because we do keeping it on spoiler, we do have some very big events that even happen in the prologue, but even happen towards the beginning of the book. And like you said, there's like a falling action. And then there are certain events that happen in the story, and you don't know really where it's going, but then it really comes together. And there are these elements of foreshadowing, things that tie in even from the prologue, even from the opening chapters. And I just thought it was beautifully poetic the way he did that. And even the way that he used poetry in the story, the way that there was adventure and love and friendship. And just so many different elements, and it's still even these like smaller there are still quieter moments, I guess, or even like these little episodic adventures that happen throughout the story. And even though it doesn't seem like it's tied into the whole of the story, when you get to the end, I feel like you see it. Like you
Yeah,
see
like
why
I've read
something.
this twice now, right? Like I reread it
Oh,
in
yeah.
2022, and like on reread, I was like every single scene, I was like, oh, that's why that's there. Like there's
Oh,
definitely like
yes.
there's a reason every scene is there. He's not doing stuff randomly. It's not
No.
always apparent why the scene is there, but there's everything is. He's not just like let's write this randomly.
Yeah. Yeah, I
I'm not
really
saying he
got that
never
sense.
does that, but he didn't do it in this book.
Yeah, that's what I've heard too. And Laura, did you want to add anything to that?
I really love a slow burn. So for me, this was not a problem. Without getting into details, I think I posted in the Discord when we were talking about it that I was so surprised that an event that severe happens that early in the book and was like, oh, okay, because there's a lot of book left to get through before we get there. And definitely did find myself at some points thinking, okay, like you kind of have a general idea as to where the outcome is going, especially if you're familiar with the history that this is influenced by. It's not too hard to discern, but I liked that. I really love when books are broken up into books or different sections. I like that we get different POVs often within those books. And in this case, I felt like we did, despite still maintaining connections to the four main people. So I really liked that because it was never that I felt I had gone too long without a particular voice, which for me can be problematic when I'm reading a hefty book. Because this isn't a super long book in terms of fantasy. I'd say it's probably on the shorter side of standalone fantasy, but it's so dense with its material, but not dense in a bad way. So I found that this was not a quick read, which is fine. Because I got this for my husband for Christmas, and I was reading Mistborn simultaneously while my husband was reading this. And I breezed through the entire trilogy of Mistborn while my husband read this one book. And I was like, why are you reading that so slowly? And now, having read it, I'm like, that's why. So I get it now. And I think it does warrant taking that extra bit of time so you can appreciate the journey that he takes you on.
Oh, beautifully said. And I'm glad you brought all that up because I wanted to go ahead and mention, at least from my experience, and I'd love to hear from you three and your experience with this. But I did take my time, like trying to understand certain things and understand different perspectives. And I found myself going back and forth with the map quite a bit. And sometimes I'll be honest, I appreciate a good fantasy map, but sometimes I'm a little lazy looking at fantasy maps, but I couldn't be with this particular book. I felt like I had to know where the heck we were and what was going on. And of course, if you know the historical context, it'll probably be really easy for you. I was very ignorant about the historical context. I had to teach myself a bit about medieval Spain after reading the book. But what was that experience like for you all? Did you feel like you had to revisit the map or follow a lot of, I mean, did you have to take your time following the moving parts? I mean, I know we're all used to reading epic fantasy, but, even for a standalone, I felt like I had to do that a little bit.
I agree, and I'm kind of the same way with fantasy books. Sometimes I look at the map once and I never flip, which is the opposite of like young Josh. When I used to read, I was always looking at the map and back and forth. But I don't tend to look at maps very often. But I did find with this book, I don't know why. I don't know exactly why, but I did tend to flip back and forth quite a bit. I don't know why.
Yeah.
But yeah, but I definitely did do that. As far as reading slower, I mean, I think it's a slower paced book. I don't know if my reading pace was any slower or if even looking at the map slowed it down. I think it took about 6 days, which is about what a
Mm.
book that length usually takes for me. So, but I did look at the map more, and I have to really think about why, because I'm not
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know that I think at the beginning I was maybe fumbling a little bit trying to understand the different sections, and I didn't know, by the way, because if, you don't know, and we're keeping this spoiler free, there obviously, this is a historical fiction book of medieval Spain, and it is in a secondary world, but it's a world that very much mimics medieval Spain, even in territory, even with what's happening geopolitically, and even the different religions are analogous to Judaism, to Islam and to Christianity. Thank you, Jake.
100%.
Thank you for sharing that.
It's just Spain. Like for
It's
those who know in the
Spain,
book. The map is there's Europe and there's Spain.
And I'll be honest, so what I didn't really know, like I said, I was a bit ignorant reading the story, but then when I was reading, I was like, I wonder if if these people here are like representative of Muslims. And then I finally looked it up, and that's when I started to realize, oh, that makes sense now. And yeah, so I guess I just wanted to add that, but anything else anybody wants to add to that?
Well, I didn't read it slowly because when I started this, I was actually stuck waiting outside an airport for my bags to get here for like 7 hours. So I read like most of the book the day I started it. I don't remember how much I was checking the map because I read it for the first time. On the second time, I kind of knew where things were. So I was, but I don't know if I was checking the map more, but I can say I read it quite quickly, actually, both times.
I didn't look at the map, honestly. I looked at it once. And I'm normally a map looker, so I don't know why that was really the case for me, but I think it's because I'm fairly familiar with the history, and I'm a double major in religion and history, so my master's degree is also in religion and history, so like I am familiar with that kind of stuff. So that might be why I was
So this is on brand for you then.
Yeah, very
And you
much.
could lead us in the historical discussion of this book.
A little bit. I could lead you, but probably more with the religious discussion in this book more than the time period. I know bits of the time period, but it's more so through religiously what's going on in these areas at the time. But I think because of that, I did read it a little bit slower because I was trying to look for all the parallels between certain groups. And I talked about it with my husband earlier today. I was like, this group is definitely this one. I was just like breaking it down for myself more than actually having a two-way conversation with him. But yeah, there's just a lot of stuff that's in this book, which is all great.
Lot. Yeah.
See, you always know when someone's like, I don't really know what's going on for this period, but I kind of do, that they actually know like quite a bit about it.
I know. Yeah. But do you all think, so I didn't feel like at the same time as I didn't know much going into the book, I felt, well, and I'm very ashamed of that, by the way, because I do have Spanish blood. So I did look up stuff after reading the book, and I was just like, oh yeah, I see all of this in the book. Like I see there's so much that if you look up the history of Spain at that time, you'll see so many parallels. But I didn't think that was necessary for enjoying the book, even if you don't know the history. You all agree with that?
100%.
Yeah,
you don't need to know it.
I mean, I knew enough to be like, oh, this represents like the land and like where Islam was. This represents like Judaism and this represents Christianity.
Yeah.
And that was the extent of my knowledge of medieval Spanish history, other than like very general knowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same here.
I think honestly, if you like historical fiction, you don't even really need to know in depth what's being discussed. It's just a historical fiction book. You kind of go into it and you go, great, it seems like it's in some medieval period that might be or may not be Spain, aka by the map is 100% Spain, but you really don't need to know what's going on to enjoy it.
Yeah. I did find that the story just, even though, like I said, at the beginning, I was trying to figure things out a bit, after a while, I felt like the story just consumed me and I just couldn't stop. I was just completely transfixed into the story. And I'm just going to add here Mariana's comment that she was surprised how well researched it is. I was shocked too when I actually started looking up the history. I thought, whoa, okay, there's a lot of details he pulled from real history here. And even characters, of course, which we'll get into. And yeah, thank you so much for validating that you don't need to know, but it might make you curious. And I think it wouldn't hurt either way, whether you look up or understand the history beforehand or you find out afterwards. To be fair, the actual theology of the faiths are completely different from the historical faiths they draw from. Jadeite is more based on Roman sun cult. Okay, well, thank you.
So yeah, the religions
that.
are not meant to be representative of the beliefs.
Yeah,
or
no.
of just the like positions.
Even the term, and we'll talk about this later maybe, but there was a term that I even like wondered that's in our real world, but I thought maybe had a different meaning in the story, which we'll talk about a little bit. But last thing I want to say before getting into spoilers is I did mention this in my review, but I wanted to talk about it again are the sex scenes, because the reason I brought that up in my review is because I have never seen a Guy Gavriel K video. Usually it's about Tigana, in which they don't talk about his use of sexy time. And most people really are not a fan of his sexy time, especially in Tigana, from what I've noticed. And I have
Yeah.
not read Tigana yet, but I just mentioned it in my review only because of that. But I do want to say that I I finished the book, and that was not what immediately came to mind. Like, I had to remind myself, "Oh, yeah, this is the author who everybody talks about for the sexy time scenes." Because that wasn't what immediately captivated me about the story, or what immediately stayed with me about the story. At the same time, when I really enjoyed those scenes, I thought that they were well written. I thought that they matched the overall tone of the story. I felt like they were, as I said in my review, a very natural progression of the character interactions. So they just didn't bother me at all. And you all don't have to talk about that, but I just
I
have to mention
will.
it. Go
I
for
will,
it.
because I hate romance. Like, romance is so not my thing in any book for the most part. But I actually really liked the way he did it in this book, to the point that I've mentioned it to a couple of people that it did feel very natural.
Mm.
I also liked that you had a woman who was owning her sexuality. That was an older woman. It wasn't where our protagonist is a teenage girl type thing that we see in a lot of fantasy. I liked that this was an established, educated woman that was saying, I can do this and it's totally fine and this is what it is. And then you also saw the dynamics between married couples that I thought was really interesting. And I actually really liked the way he integrated it into the story and how it affected relationships throughout the novel. I thought it was a good usage of it. So all in all, it passed for me,
Yay.
which is rare, because I am usually that person that as soon as I see people start liking each other, I'm like, okay, great. So, yeah, this for me this was good.
Yes, I totally agree with you, Laura. I personally like sex positive books, and I'm all for that. And
Yeah.
at the same time, I'll be honest, I'm very hit or miss about it when I read about it sometimes. Sometimes I just feel like some authors do it better than others. And in this case, I thought it was solid, like I
I thought it
said.
felt more organic than like sometimes how Abercrombie sex scenes just kind of just kind of come out of nowhere.
I mean,
They tend to be
very much
hilarious,
so.
though.
They
Yeah,
are very
yeah,
funny.
always hilarious. But I mean, they felt important to all of the scenes, and a couple of them it was just kind of fade to black anyway. So
Mhm.
Yeah.
maybe, I mean, Jay can speak about it because he's read GGK more. I mean, maybe this is just a book where they are better well done than some of the others where we get all the
I
criticism.
think there's probably I think they're generally in there for a reason. There are probably like a couple scenes in his 15 novels where I'm like, really? And that I just don't feel had to be there, or could have been a little bit shorter. I can think of only like two off the top of my head. There's one in the middle of Tigana, and there's one in chapter 1 of The Last Light of the Sun. Maybe, I mean, although on reread of Tigana, I'm like, okay, this is what you were going for. This is why it's here. But I usually, like, I mention them in my reviews because I'm like, this is here, just so people know that, because I know, some people they won't want to read something if it's there. Some people, maybe they'll want to read it more if it's there. Both of those are totally fine. And I mean, there's going to be some sexy time scene in every Guy Gavriel K book, probably. I might be missing one. It's not going to be what the book is primarily about, but it's going to be there. Generally, it just doesn't, like, generally books having like being more or less horny, more or less sexy time doesn't affect my enjoyment that much unless they're like really bad, which I don't think these are, or he wouldn't be like one of my favorite authors, and this wouldn't be one of my favorite standalone novels of all time. Like,
I feel too, if it's character building, it's okay. If it's kind of just frivolously thrown in there, that's when, for me, it tends to be more problematic. But like I said, I felt that for one of our characters, this was kind of a core part of her person. And for part of our married couple, that was also a core part of her person, but from a different perspective. So it was, in my mind, very well done because it was nuanced. And it's not just, okay, these two characters are going to go at it now. Let's talk about that for the next 2 pages and then we'll move on. for me, it was, okay, no, you're actually getting to know your character through these scenes as well. And that to me is what made it a more enriching story as opposed to just being frivolity and it being there.
I mean,
Totally.
generally, I think I judge sex scenes by the same criteria I judge any other scenes. Like, is it adding to the story?
Yeah.
If you remove it, does it change the story? Same for like action scenes. Like, there shouldn't be people trying to hit each other with swords. That if you just like remove the details and replaced it with, they tried to hit people with swords then for 5 minutes and then they ran away. Like, it's the same for sex scenes. If you remove it, does it have no impact on the plot or characters? It's probably not very good. And I just don't think that's the case here.
100%.
Yeah, and I really didn't feel like, because I think there are different types of sexy time scenes in books, and I think there are ones in which the author is trying to elicit a certain response from the reader, and I didn't feel like that with these sexy time scenes. I felt like they were more just presenting the natural character development as we talked about, and yeah, I there were a couple that I did think were a little on the comical side, but not in a bad way. And yes, I really enjoyed. I just enjoyed the characters so much in this book. So I think before we go into spoilers, just any last thoughts you all want to say spoiler free, maybe who you would recommend this book to, who you wouldn't recommend this book to. And we're going to start with Josh this time.
I think this is a great book for people that maybe aren't sure if they like fantasy. I think it's a good way to kind of toe your, to put your foot in the water a little bit, because the magical elements are so almost non-existent. They're so minimal. But the medieval setting, which of course is very prevalent in fantasy, is maybe a way for someone who's hasn't tried fantasy. This might be a good entry point for that kind of person.
Yeah, and this is one of his least fantastical books. He generally isn't high magic, but this might be like, I think maybe literally every other book, like if I had to rank them from most magic to least magic, this might be least, but a lot of them are going to be really close.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a little touch of magic, but
and I think just lovers of historical fiction would love this, even though it's not technical. I mean, it's Spain, but it's not Spain. I think it felt more like that to me, just because the magical elements were so small. But and the other thing is, just if you're someone who just loves an author that has a incredible command of the English language, you'll probably like GGK, at least in this book. This is the only one I've read so far. I got more to go.
Yeah, I mean, he man writes well in all books. I'd also, if you're a historical fiction fan and you're like, but why isn't it just Spain? Like, why change the names? I'm going to post an essay in the comments that GGK wrote about this that just answers the question way better than I could. It's an annoyingly good essay because he's often annoyingly good at stuff. So if you are curious about that, there are some minor spoilers that you'll probably forget by the time you get there. But I mean, if I had to sum it up, it's basically the two reasons he does it. And after reading, I was like, yeah, those actually both totally make sense. Is one, it's as a reflection of the fact that he doesn't actually know what happens. Like, he has these characters who might be based on real people, but he's like, I don't know what these people were thinking. Like, even if I research it really well, like, I might be writing this person as a horrible person, and they might have actually been a great person. And also for people who are like, know a lot about history, like Laura here, they don't know what's going to happen, because sometimes people who lived in reality are going to die, and sometimes it plays out differently. So it's kind of like, if you are reading about a period where that's even more based on a historical situation, it might not go the way you think it does. And you can't really do that for a historical fiction book, because it's like, I mean, you're having like everyone has the same names and you're just like lying, but you're not reading about Spain, you're reading about Esperanza, so it might not go the way it did in reality.
Yeah. So well said, Jacob. Excellent. And what about you, Laura?
I think it's good for someone that really likes to be immersed in their setting, because I feel like the story from the get-go is very descriptive, but not in an obtrusive and obnoxious way where it's overly descriptive. It's just good at placing you in the scene. And I feel that he does that the entire way through, that I never felt like I was grasping to figure out where I could imagine everything so vividly in my head. He's just very articulate, and his way of immersing you in his world is just extraordinary. So if you're someone that really appreciates that about an author, this would probably be a good book for you. I would say if you don't like historical fiction or are questionable about historical fiction, this probably isn't a good book for you, because I would say it's more historical fiction than it is fantasy. But like Josh said, if you think that you may like fantasy but edge on more of the side of historical fiction, this might be a good bridge for you, because it does have that low fantasy feel to it. And honestly, it reads to me like an epic story, in that you have the books within the book, his use of poetry, his linguistic abilities. If you like Homer or you like myth, this is probably going to be up your alley. So I would recommend it to someone who likes those things.
I would have one more thing, and if your name is Philip Chase, I think you would really like this book. Just randomly, you know, just as a thought. Maybe Sarantine even more. Who knows? But
Philip, you need to read this book. Don't reread Tigana.
you've
Read
already
The
read
Lions of
Tigana.
Albatross.
Come on.
I've been talking, by the way, with Janny Wirtz on Twitter, and this is one of her favorite books of all time, by the way. So she has read it multiple times. Can't recommend it enough. From one brilliant writer to another, you got to check out. The Lions of Al-Rassan. And I would say that it's interesting because it is historical fiction, and it is very low on the fantasy elements. At the same time, if you're somebody who enjoys, I think it could go both ways, actually. So speaking to Josh's point, I think that this would be a great entry point, even if you're new to fantasy. I'm actually trying to get my mother to read it, who does know a bit about medieval Spain and is not really well read when it comes to fantasy, but loves excellent prose.
You
I
said
know
she
she
liked
would.
Piranesi, right?
She loved Piranesi.
So
Yeah,
I think she'd love this,
yeah,
honestly.
yeah. She's a prose snob in the best way possible. I think she would love the prose. I think she would enjoy this. At the same time, for those people who are lovers of epic fantasy, I still think you might enjoy this, because I hesitate to call this epic fantasy, but at the same time, you are dealing with wide geopolitical situations here, with a big map, with a lot of characters. So a lot of things that we're familiar with in fantasy. I think you would feel at home with this kind of story at the same time. It does, as I mentioned, have a different kind of structure, but I still think it was so beautifully handled for a standalone. Incredible character moments, great humor, great romance, great friendships. You get the feeling that you're with these living legends, and you just can't get enough. And so I just think it's a beautiful story. Highly recommend for everybody to pick it up. If you haven't, I'm in love with this story. I had the biggest book hangover after I finished it. I'm the biggest book hangover.
Victory.
Yeah.
Me winning looks like.
Yeah. All right. And so, yes, thank you so much, Jacob, for recommending this. We are going to go ahead and go into spoilers now. Not sure what more we could add except just talking about, well, characters in particular. I tried to avoid going specifically into characters for the non-spoiler section, but we did get some wonderful comments here in like Rodrigo and Miranda. And I know Mariana has a lot to say about El Cid. So there is El Cid, Rodrigo. And looking up his history, there's a lot of history about this real man, this real legend, this military captain in Spain. And it seems like he was responsible for uniting, I'm trying to think of the right terminology, but that northern part of Spain. And at the same time, it became divided, just like it is in the book, Sancho the Fat, and his sons, the division there. And he was truly exiled, and he did work for the Muslims at a certain point. So there are just so many interesting parallels. But
Yeah, I think the inspiration for the story was that GGK was just like reading history. When he finishes a book, he just starts like reading history until he's like, "Hey, that would make a cool book." And he was like, "Hey, there was this guy who Amari bin Quran is based on, and he got exiled to this city, and then El Cid got exiled to this city, like pretty close apart. what if they like actually interacted with each other? That could be cool. And then things happened, and
This
that
Yeah.
lines
to
are
me
all.
is how it felt like a Homeric epic, because, okay, spoilery time, so we're safe. But the encountering between the two of them, yeah, at the end felt very Achilles and Hector for me. I was like, you have the representatives of one group, the representatives of the other, and they're going at it. And I finished the book today. So this is very fresh for me. And I was on the verge of tears for like an hour. And I'm not a crier when I read or in general in life. So that was a very awkward feeling for me. But that for me was that like epic feeling of fantasy, that you have these two amazing characters that do cultivate this friendship, which is just so well done in the book. And you have the historical versions of these people that you know were both quite significant. And he's done his own version of that, but in this heart-wrenching and devastating way. Because it was one of those scenarios, I was like, I don't know who I want to win
I
this.
know.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's one of my
cool.
favorite like
Miserable.
scenes
Yeah.
in fantasy. And it's like the epic duel, but also having like Jahane and Miranda also being
Oh, I
friends, both
know.
watching the duel, and like I don't want either of them to die.
And that's
Yeah.
exactly it. I was sitting there when Miranda starts thinking she's had 20 years with Rodrigo, but Jahan has only had 6 months with Amon. I was like, oh my God, you're killing me here, Miranda. Like,
It's also Miranda's one of my favorite characters in this book. I
she's
love
so
Miranda.
great. She's
Oh,
amazing.
they're
Her scene at the
amazing.
ranch. Oh,
Yeah,
like,
when Miranda just killed the guy, because it
Yeah.
was like, so I was like, oh, they're gonna let him go, and then he's gonna come back later, but this time, like, you won't have the advantage, and bad things are gonna happen. And Miranda was just like, psych.
That for me is the only solace for Rodrigo dying at the end, is that Miranda is such a self-sufficient character, as we can see throughout this book, that of the two women, I almost felt at the end that she would have fared better with her partner being taken from her. I'm like, she knows how to take care of herself, this woman. That's not to say that Jahane doesn't, because she does, but it just felt different. And Miranda's character arc I thought was fabulous, but that scene was not the first scene that surprised me. Literally, that first chapter with the Day of the Moat totally took me by surprise,
Same.
which was so amazing, because it's been a long time since a book has genuinely surprised me, and I was thrilled. So,
Mhm.
yeah, a lot of that in this book.
He really shows you what a tyrant looks like. Like that. That King of Cartada is just evil.
worst.
He's horrible.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and he's one of the
Gosh.
authors where I'm like, one of the struggles of adapting it is if it doesn't look exactly right, I will be the annoying fan who's annoyed. Like for the Day of the Moat, if they don't have the lineup walking into the room, blocked by the glare of the sun, decapitation, like if that's not right, I'm like, no, if it doesn't end with Amar and Rodrigo dueling as the sun goes down in a way so they actually become like from our eyes silhouettes dueling and we can't tell who's who.
Can't tell
Like
who's who,
no,
yeah.
it has to look how it was described in the book. Like
Is there an adaptation coming?
no, but
Okay.
I just want there to be.
I
It's
thought
one-
it
Put it out
would be
there
a
in
really
ethers.
great adaptation too while I was reading it. It's one of those things that I was like, this would be such a great mini series, because there's enough detail and material, especially with side characters, that you could have like a 6 to 8 episode arc, I feel like, for the show. But I was thinking the same thing. I was like, there's these very key moments that they would need to be done correctly. And of course, the beheading scene is so early on in the story that I was like, this is just setting the bar very, very high going forward. But yeah, it was amazing.
Oh,
But back to the duel scene, I don't always like the convention that he used a couple times in this book where the author kind of obscures what happens.
Yeah.
But I loved it in that duel. I loved
Yes.
going into that epilogue and not knowing, and then
Yes.
finally, and then he tricks you again in the epilogue.
You think,
know?
you think it's Belmonte that's lived,
Yeah.
and you're like, Okay, which at that point I was slightly relieved. I was like, "Oh, it's Rodrigo," and I was like, "It's not Rodrigo."
See, what I
So,
thought was I thought Alvar was married to Jahane, and then you find out. So I don't always like that convention, but I thought it was done so well at
agreed.
that point in the book.
Do you all think so? A couple of things. One is, did you, maybe I'll start with my question first. Do you all think it's possible that Rodrigo let Chiron win?
No.
No.
I think they were both fighting for their life. Yeah. If
think
they were
only-
going to let the other person win, they would step down and be like, I'll just not fight for they had to fight that. That's one of the things that made it happen. So no, I think they were both they neither wanted to kill the other, but also they were both trying to kill the other with everything they had.
I also think they respect each other so much that they wouldn't have done anything other than their best to kill the other and give them like a clean death kind of thing. That was the vibe I got. I'm not sure if anyone here are any of you familiar with the Last Kingdom Saxon Chronicles series at all?
I know what it is, but I haven't read it.
No.
Okay, well, there's a similar scenario in that in which two characters that are friends are put in a duel for each other, and they basically say to each other beforehand that like, I'm gonna do you the honor of like trying to do my best and then giving you a clean death. And I was like, this is the type of relationship I feel that these two have gained over the last several months.
And it's foreshadowed since the very beginning. Like, you know that they're eventually going to come to this. You know that their circumstances are going to lead them to this duel. And I have to say that as much as they went through in this story, I still didn't want it to happen. And there was this particular scene leading up to that duel where it's, let's see, it's Alvar is watching this, and it's between King Ramiro and Rodrigo. And King Ramiro is talking about, then we're going to conquer and colonize and do this and do that. And then I think it's Rodrigo is asking, and then King Ramiro more softly, almost amused, I will probably rest and try to make a belated peace with Jad for all my transgressions beneath his light. I laughed out loud when I read that. I was like, I'm going to do this, all these evil, horrible acts. And then, like, what's the point? Why are you doing this? What kind of cycle is this going to perpetuate? And then his answer is like, and then I'll just, do all this destruction. And then I'll ask God to forgive me at the end of my life. And I laughed out loud. But then when Rodrigo is asked, like King Ramiro is basically asking Rodrigo, are you going to, come along with me? I kept on thinking Rodrigo's not going to go with that. He's changed. He's grown. He's become friends with these people who's changed him. And no, he's like, yes, sign me up. And I'm like, no, I couldn't believe it. But then it's kind of funny because I was talking with my mother later on about this character and about Spanish history. And she said that she's always teasing my dad that anytime he's stubborn about something, she's like, that's your Spanish blood. Because the Spanish are just so stubborn, and that was how they ended up conquering, is because they were so stubborn and they just held their will. So it's consistent, I think, with what these characters are like. But it floored me at the same time when I read that. I didn't feel like I sided with Rodrigo philosophically. I sided philosophically more with Chiron. I don't know. What did you all think of that?
I liked just earlier in that scene where he basically just comes out and says, we're not in a holy war. We're really here for conquest. And I love that kind of conflict. Like, is it conquest or is it holy war? And he just flat out says, we'll use the holy war, the religion, as a means for our political ambition.
It's a holy war in name only.
Yes, yeah. I loved that part of it, because so often it's always depicted as it's the true believers and they just want to spread their word and their religion. And he's like, no. We just want to take over the continent like we used to have, so that I can ride all the way to the coast. So I definitely love that thematically.
I think it also too. Go ahead.
I was gonna say one thing that I think kind of like makes me even though obviously I've been with Rodrigo while he becomes friends with like Amari bin Karan. So I'm like, no friendship. But during his life, like when he was young, AL-RASSAN was dominant, and they were constantly like raiding Esperana and like taking things and killing people he cared about. So on one hand, he's like, no, I don't want to kill I don't want to go to war. But also he is like, oh, an opportunity to like retake this area. Like they'll no longer be able to, like, this secures like where I live and the future of like my descendants from not being raided.
Yes.
So I like, obviously I don't want them to fight, but for both of them, like I don't know if I could really ask them to not, like,
It's so nuanced though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because and I
Yeah.
love how Alvar's perspective is used as a narrative device to show the complexity of all of this.
Mhm.
Because, you know, if you look at it broadly, it's like there's this cycle of conquest that just never ends. And even if Rodrigo wins, then what is he leaving his sons to? He's leaving his sons to fight amongst each other, right? And it's like there's a cycle of like sons, brothers fighting each other, or brothers fighting fathers even. And it's just this ugly cycle. And at the same time, you want to do what's right for your kin, for your, I don't know. So it's just so complicated. But at the same time, I just, one of the things I loved the most about this story is even though you have these different religious areas of the world that are against each other, that have this history with one another, especially the Jadites just get it the worst in a way. And like, but at the same time as that's all happening, these characters who end up intersecting, and I attributed this maybe to the fact that they are well traveled and they are more seasoned in life, with the exception of Alvar, but they are able to see past their religious differences. Like they don't immediately trust each other, but they still, like, that's not the area of conflict for them. Like it is, but it isn't. You know what I mean? They're able to become friends and see that that doesn't really change the value of a person, if that makes sense. I don't know if I'm articulating this
Yeah,
very
like
well.
I
they're
think you
on the
are.
side they are because of like partially because of their religion, but they're not like trying to kill each other because they're like, Rodrigo is not trying to kill Amari bin Karan because like he's an Asherite. Like
Yeah.
Right.
that, like that's not a motivation for him.
Right.
You see that develop further though with Alvar and Jahane. I think that's the relationship that it's explored the most, because Alvar, I think, is the character that probably has the biggest religious journey. With the fact that he keeps referencing back in his mind that his mother makes these pilgrimages, and the queen that initiated that pilgrimage wanted to kill all of Jahane's people. So I thought that was very good, because you have to have, I think, that one character that's on the line of saying, is this fundamentally what I believe? Can I get on board with this? Whereas, you know, the other two are not going to waver, I feel like. So it has to be that kind of like young, innocent person. I was saying to my husband earlier today that I feel like Alvar is the hero's journey in this story. He's the one that kind of leaves home. He has this transformation and then kind of comes back at the end of the story and is sort of our narrator with all these other people around him, which made it really interesting in the religious context, and I really enjoyed. My only thing in terms of the religion in this story is that I wish there would have been more of it, because I feel like there's not enough descriptors as to what each religion fundamentally believes and does. There are certain things that are indicated, that like there's call to prayer. Basically, one religion values the moon, the other has the sun disk, that kind of thing. But there's not enough, I feel, rules almost for the establishment of why these people don't like other faiths and why they want to eradicate them, type thing. So that would have been for me the one thing that I would really liked more of, to which my husband then said to me, if I read more GGK, I would get more on the religions. So I get that, but I feel like if you're reading it as a standalone book and not as a universe that he's creating, I would have liked a little bit more of that in the story, but that might just be me.
Which, in your defense, he did not write it originally intending it for it to be a universe. He just, when he continued and he was writing the Sarantine Mosaic, he was like, gee, I mean, I already did a bunch of this world building. Like, what if I just like didn't do more
Right.
and restart.
Yeah.
I can see
I
that.
did feel like there were certain indicators of religion, but I kind of liked that it was a little in the background more because the friendships, the connections between the characters was what came out in the forefront. It became more of the focus. And you as a reader, I feel like you transcended the idea that Chiran was an Asherite or that Jahan was a Jaddite or not Jaddite. Wait,
In death.
Kinda, thank you. And that I think I got that wrong earlier. I'm sorry if I did. And that Rodrigo was a Jaddite. Like I feel like those were in my mind, but it wasn't at the forefront of my mind because I was just so involved in their connections, in the care that they have for each other. It was there though. I mean, even at the beginning, I think that Jahane has some conversation with Rodrigo when they meet and saying,
Yes.
you know what your queen said about the Kindath? Like she basically saw them as less than animals.
Yeah.
And it was surprised, and yet he proved himself. He proved himself that to her that he didn't see her that way, that he was able to look past that. And I just wanted to get a little bit into the introduction of characters. Let's start with the prologue a little bit.
Can I just say one more thing on
Sure.
that? For
Yeah.
me, it wasn't the characters, it was more the background characters, like our kings. I would have liked the religion more so to be associated with the rulers rather than our main players, because I feel like if we have an understanding of like, this is the faith of AL-RASSAN, this is the faith of Cortana, like that for me would have made a little bit more sense as to why there was all of the tension and potential holy war coming, but wouldn't have affected the general relationships with each other. Because I agree, like I thought that he did a good job on the relationship level. Like that was enough for me. It was more just contextual background for me.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Good. Anybody want to add to that?
I wonder if, so I don't know if this is the case. This is me, because I think that's totally a valid thing to want different. I wonder if it is somewhat intentional that the differences are muddy because the conflict is not driven by like, oh, we don't like this specific thing they do, because then it might attract attention to like, okay, but is that specific thing good? The conflict is driven by these people are different, what they worship is different, and different is bad from like the
That's true.
the
I can get on board with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that might be that why.
It's also, I think, partly where we start the story too, because there's already been so much history of conquering and invading between the North and the South, and then division amongst those lands. And so, like, even starting from the very beginning, like in the prologue, Chiran, you don't even get a lot of explanation about this, I think. Like,
very little.
Your point, Laura, like, you don't get a lot of explanation, just very little in the prologue about like what it meant that Chiran kills the last caliph.
Yeah.
And by the way, that was the term I was mentioning in the non-spoiler section because I looked up that term. That's actually a real term in Islam, but I don't really understand. I feel like it's a little different maybe in this book than it is in real life.
So historically, a caliph was like a military leader. But they often were personally connected to Muhammad. So they once had kind of resided in a particular place, would often then have been given a position of authority within their faith. So it's kind of, I think, more interchangeable on that note in this story, but it's generally a person of great authority within the Muslim faith.
Yeah. Yeah. And in this particular story, it's somebody who is religiously selected into that role. So I feel like it has a very different, more like a higher religious context maybe than in real life. I could be wrong about that, but that was the impression I got. And I would like to, but what did you all think about Chiran? Let's talk about Chiran because this was a character I wasn't sure about from the prologue. I thought, whoa, he just goes in and kills this old man.
I liked him immediately.
You know?
I liked him immediately from the scene with Jahane.
Yes.
Okay.
That
I will
scene,
fall out the window.
Okay, this guy's pretty cool. I don't know where this is going. And then when we see him later, I was, of course, very, very excited. But yeah, I pretty much liked him from the start. I don't know if I liked him in the prologue, but definitely the scene with Jahane, you could just see the charm, and you could even see the chemistry. And yeah, I definitely was a fan early on.
Yeah, same. Not necessarily from the prologue. Prologue, I was kind of like, I don't know how to feel about these people, but he just gets by on like, he's just extremely charming. Guy Gavriel is just able to write him extremely charming, and not just like in a people think this person's charming and charismatic, as in like I'm charmed by him.
Right.
I felt the impact of his charisma. I'd like if I met him, I'd be like, yeah, this guy's. I like this guy. This guy's cool. So yeah, he is my seal of approval.
And see,
go ahead, Joanna.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, and see, for me, this speaks to Guy Gavriel Kay's prose, because it takes a skilled writer to write a character with that much charisma, and he does it for every single main character. And it just, Guy Ran was so charismatic, and I was swept away also with the window scene. I was also questioning him in the prologue, and then I was like, oh, this guy is so cool. Go ahead, Laura.
In the prologue, though, he's already nuanced, because he's questioning so deeply if what he's doing is right. And he goes, well, I'm already committed. So at this point, like, I'm just going to have to do it and then see if the consequences were worth it. And that to me was interesting, because you're already establishing that he's not really a good guy, but he's not a bad guy. And I hate when people are just bad because they're bad. And in this case, his character so much throughout the entirety of the story is put in these positions where he has to do really terrible things. But then you look at the morals of why he's doing them and you're like, I get it. So I think that is also where GGK shines, because you can take these morally ambiguous characters and you do make them very charming. And then simultaneously you look at them and go, yeah, moralistically, I can get in line with what you're doing and saying.
Also, I just think it's funny that he's just like, I don't want to be known for killing the last Cleef. Know me for my poetry. Damn
it. His 6 lines of poetry.
He's like, don't want to be famous for that.
But I have to say that was a huge hook for me when I read the blurb, and I read that this person was a poet, diplomat, and soldier. I thought, that is what I want to read about that character.
Still trying to go ahead, Josh. When you first get like the Day of the Moats thing, it's like, wait, is he involved in this? And I think chapter 1 ends with like the description of like him
going in,
like finding out what happened, or it might be early chapter 2, but I forget exactly what it's described. But I just remember like it being very vivid and just being like, oh, he's pissed, and like a very like cold, like enduring anger. Like this is not going to be like, I'm going to throw a tantrum and then be over it. This is like, is going to change like how I interact with people, and maybe kill another really famous important person. And like
I took that as I didn't know if he was going to live through it, because he was clearly not involved with it, and the way that it's described that he's walking in was basically parallel verbiage to how the others had walked in and then were beheaded. And I was like, if they kill him right now, that's a bold move. Like, I wasn't sure at that point. I was like, I think that he's probably going to live, but I liked that there was that question.
Yeah, I mean, who would ever introduce a really good character and then kill them in that chapter? Definitely never going to happen in another one of his books. Read them all, you find out what I'm talking about. All right, that's me.
No, I love how he does. I love how he did the characters like that early on, because I think, Laura, you mentioned it earlier, like some people might think of it as slow, or maybe it was Jake, I forget, kind of slower at the beginning, besides the first big scene. Not knowing, I think at first I thought Jahane's the main character, and then you think it's Rodrigo, and it bounces around so much. I felt like, well, maybe nobody's safe.
Yeah.
Who are we following here? And I've ever since, I don't know, one of the Hobb books, I never read the back blurbs anymore.
I don't either.
So I didn't know that Amar. Yeah, I didn't know that Amar was going to be a main character, and it was a pleasant surprise as he developed into one, because I really had no idea, and it was a character I liked every step of the way. But early in the book, I did feel uneasy a lot of times, because I didn't know who was going to live, who was going to die, because I wasn't sure exactly who the story was about.
Yeah, it doesn't really have a protagonist. It has like a trio, maybe even a quartet.
I would say a quartet. Yeah.
The
And
story,
Definitely
though,
include.
with him and her Jahane's father, that scene
Mm.
was so good.
Oh,
I was just sitting there going, "Oh my god, this book." Like, that for me was just the character work in that scene alone was so good.
I remember typing in Discord after reading that. How is this already so good?
Yeah. Like, it's
Yes.
I was just like, we're on like chapter 2. Like, what is going
Yes.
on? How is this
Yes.
already so good?
And I mean, all the character introductions are very strong in this book. Let's talk about Jahane because we have to talk about Jahane. She's such a force to be reckoned with. I love how sassy she is. I don't know if that's the right word, but she's just a very assertive character. She's
Strong.
very she wants to be taken seriously. When she's a doctor, she wants to be treated like a doctor and not a woman specifically. But at the same time, as she's very professional and very straightforward and assertive and not afraid to just tell people off, I really love that she's also somebody who leaves the Kindath Quarter at night and goes beyond the wall where the prostitutes are,
Yeah.
has a drink on the town with them. She treats them, but then she also parties with them. And so she has these different sides to her personality. And I just found her very three-dimensional in that way.
I was a little worried when we first meet her, when the servant, I guess, comes to her and says, like, "Can you come to the guy's house?" And she comes across as a really angry character, and I was thinking, like, "Oh, no, we're just gonna have another angry female character," because I feel like that tends to be a lot of the MO in fantasy, is a lot of authors just don't know how to properly write women,
Mhm.
and that changed very quickly. I was like, "Oh, no, she's actually a very well done character," because there's motivations for why she does the things that she does and says the things that she does. And like I said earlier, having a protagonist that's a woman that isn't 16, is comfortable with who she is well educated. Like, it's just all the things you would want for a female protagonist in a fantasy story. So that to me was delightful. I loved it.
Yeah. She is prickly though. She is
She is.
somebody who
She's great.
doesn't she like there was that scene later on in the book where she struggled to say thank you. Like she struggled to admit that she was in danger and that people helped her
Yep.
and that people cared about her instead of her caring for other people. It was like hard to open up and soften. It's hard for her at times to soften, but then when she does, if you could tell that she's just such a beautiful person. Like there's just this light and energy when she laughs and she lets go.
I
And
found that so real because I know a lot of independent people are like that, where they struggle to admit that they needed help or they need help,
or to
present
ask for help,
tense.
right? Like,
Yeah, and they won't ask. So I found her. Well, I found all the characters just so three dimensional.
mm,
And I think Joanna, you said something in your review where you felt like you were reading about real people in history, and
yeah,
that's absolutely 100% how I felt with these characters. They just
yeah, they
felt real,
definitely.
like they were real people.
One thing he's consistently very, very good at, in my opinion, is writing characters who don't feel like they're 21st century people living in medieval Spain. He's
Yeah.
writing people with like beliefs and thought processes and actions that feel like they live in the time period they're from. Exceptionally good at that. I like the part where she taunts the guy who they're like ambushing, like they're arranging the ambush later. I don't know. I thought it was
oh
hilarious.
yes.
That's one part that I
Good,
had
yeah.
someone like make fun of and be like, "Oh, this is over the top. This would never do." And I'm like, "No, that was hilarious. Like that would totally be effective if I was guarding a train back and Jahane was shouting that. I would absolutely become irritable and start making irrational decisions. Like that would 100% work, and I stand by it as effective tactics from Amar and Rodrigo.
Totally. I agree.
And I like how she didn't even ask why to do it. They were just like, "Hey, start shouting like provocative things," and she was just like, "Sure, yeah."
She was egged on by the fact they were laughing. They're all like snickering with her. I
Yeah.
love
Well, it was
that
great because
too.
we saw their perspective after we saw.
Yeah,
the
we
result of it.
just saw like he's just like
Yeah.
a woman was shouting this,
Yeah.
and then we see it's Jahan. It was hilarious.
I was
I
really
know.
surprised it was her, which was
Yes.
nice. It was again another surprise. I was like, he keeps surprising me. This is great.
I
So,
love it when characters surprise you in books. Absolutely. That was a pleasant one. Now, as far as Rodrigo is concerned, before getting to Alvar, which I know Mariana wants us to get to, but I really love the way. So there are a couple of characters. I don't know if they're the Muwadi tribe. They're
Oh, yeah.
Galib and Yazir.
Yep.
And I think they're the ones, and I could be wrong about that, but I think their POV is early in the book when they are looking at the farmers, the people who live on the outskirts of Vizana, and I think the lands in between there. And they're looking at them as weak. It's when they attack that village.
Yeah, it's early on.
And they attack that village thinking, oh, these are the weak people, and we're going to do all these horrible things to them and rape the women. And meanwhile, when Rodrigo was leading his people, one of the first things that he talks about, and I can't remember if it's specifically through Alvar's perspective, I'd need to go back and look, but Rodrigo makes a comment, and I immediately highlighted it in my book. And so I have so many highlights, but I highlighted it because he said, the farmers are the true warriors. And I was like, oh, yeah, he knows the people of the land. He understands the people of the land. He doesn't put people, like, he understands their value, he understands their resilience. And so just seeing the contrast of perspectives between those tribesmen who just saw them as weak people, and who there was the religious zealotry that was going on in their belief and their mindset and their perspective. And you saw how Rodrigo did not see that. He's like, no, these are the true warriors. And then he comes along, and I guess there was some conflict there, and I can't remember exactly how that played out specifically, but I just remember that stood out in my mind.
I have two things on this that are both
Sure.
things that I really like. The first is just I've really enjoy how broadly Guy Gavriel depicts humanity. Like there's some people who are like kind of have a depressing view of humanity, and some authors have like a kind of optimistic view of humanity. I think he's really one of the people who shows like the full spectrum. Like he will have some truly awful people and some like truly noble people. And I appreciate that because I think they are both accurate reflections of what exists. And the other is that a lot of the time warfare in historical fiction and fantasy is very frequently shown as like armies trying to stab each other. And what I really like about a lot of his novels where warfare is a thing is that for a huge amount of periods of history, like if you were a soldier, you became more likely to die of disease, but less likely to die of being stabbed, because the other armies don't actually want to fight armies because that increases their chances of being stabbed. And it ends up becoming a chain of like, they just don't fight each other and like are just going to kill like civilians and take stuff because they can't fight back. And I really appreciate that. Like he shows that like, yeah, a lot of the time these armies, like they're not fighting each other. They're just like taking turns killing each other's civilians. And a lot of the soldiers are going to die for other reasons, but like armies obviously did fight each other in history, but like there was not as many like huge pitched battles as there were like skirmishes and raids. And I really appreciate how that's depicted.
Actually, now that I think about it, that raid was other Jedites that came, right?
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
That's what it was. Because I do
Dorada's
remember
fruit.
that
Yeah.
actually was
and he was pissed. Like he whipped
yes, he was pissed off, and he saw things differently though than the other Jedites. And I thought that was saying something too, because like I think I said this in my review, like you do have the zealots in this particular story. You do have the religious leaders, like that leader of Cortada. You do have people who just have a very warped, disgusting perspective of the world. I loved the scene towards the end when Jahane is talking to the queen, or I think King Ramido's wife, or somebody. I can't remember, some royalty there, and just like made a joke, some kind of joke or something to show that she was like a human. I don't know. There was a lot of
to say it, but she didn't. She said it in her brain that like she was gonna bake a baby for dinner type thing, like a kinda. Yeah.
Something like, thank you for remembering that. It's already a little muddy because it's been a few weeks now since I finished the book. But I love the way you see that like he doesn't show it all one way or another way. He gives you a mix of those perspectives.
Yeah, Rodrigo is my favorite character, which is not surprising because Hector is also my favorite character from the Iliad. So I was saying before, it's very similar for me. That kind of is what happens. But he's a very nuanced character, which is so great because you see him as a military commander, you see him as a father, you see him as a husband, you see him as a friend, you see his religion. Like you really get to know all the pieces of him and how each of them work independently and how they work collectively, which is why I think the ending is frustrating for you, Joanna, because you're like, you've developed all of these wonderful friendships and thoughts and abilities, and yet you're still kind of reverting back. But I think that's so true to human nature that I think that's actually probably a plus in GGK's column, because I don't love when authors, not just fantasy authors, are like, well, they've gone on this journey and they're all better now, so we're just gonna not make any terrible decisions ever again. It's like, that's not how humans are. And because he's such a fleshed out character, you just hope that he'll make that decision. And when he doesn't, it's more heartbreaking, but I think it's also more realistic. But his whole arc is just, it's so, so good. And his relationship with Miranda was everything.
Oh, totally. Yeah,
It's
no, I
one of my
totally
favorite
agree
like
with you.
couples in the genre, like just
Yeah.
their chemistry, and partially because Miranda I don't know who my favorite character in this
He's
book
so
is,
good.
but it might be Miranda. Miranda might be my favorite character in
Miranda.
this book,
Oh,
just by like on a per scene basis.
loved her.
She's so great.
Yeah,
Loved
I have
her.
like a random quote that I wrote down, and I'm like, all right, where is this? One second. I have this. Where is it? I had it. Okay, here this is my pitch for Miranda Bellamonte. She imagined seeing her husband riding home just then, emerging from the trees into the wide grassy space before their walls. She imagined shooting him as he rode up. Every time, because it starts off as like, oh, stereotypical. Yeah, it's like you already heard about Miranda. It's like the most beautiful woman in Hispana. She's like, oh, when's my husband gonna turn? It's like, I didn't shoot him. Like, I'm pissed. You put the kids in danger. And speaking of sexy time scenes that added to the story, when Rodrigo comes back,
Yeah.
and then like talks to Miranda after, like that conversation is so good.
It's so funny. Yeah.
And I also love the kids after. It's like, do you think we tricked him? And it's like, Father, no way we tricked him.
way.
But he'll tell us why we didn't trick him.
And she is like a Spanish matriarch, though. I love her. She was fantastic. But Rodrigo, wow, I don't know. I think he's one of the most complex characters in so many ways, because I mean, like, just seeing him again, we talked, so let's go to Alvar now, because obviously Alvar changes quite a bit throughout this story, as Laura mentioned. He's kind of our young innocent character, the wanderer character, and he sees him as this hero. And we've already established that Rodrigo has this history. He's already a legend when we start the story. But my goodness, like, if I were in Alvar's position, I feel like I would just be so confused, because right away there's that first conflict where he's fighting another Jadeite, and then he fights Jadites actually a few times in the story.
Well, he fights Jadites, and then he falls in love with a Kindath.
Yeah,
I mean, what he went through as a character. I mean, it was kind of the author just showing the conflict through the eyes of someone young and seeing more sides of the story.
Yeah,
but
he fought their way out of like the Kindath scene at the end, which
and then
Gavriel should not be allowed to be that good at action, by the way. He's too good at other things.
But then at the end, you see that Alvar is Kindath, and I mean, it just no, he definitely had the biggest narrative arc, and I love the fake out at the end where you think he's with Jahane, but he's not. But I don't know that. All of the characters, again, I mentioned the historical side of things. I just thought the subtlety, and when you hear about GGK, at least what I've heard, and it's only probably like Jake and Bridger's channels, but even other places, hearing about GGK, a lot of discussions don't hinge on the characters as much, maybe because he's so good at everything else. But I thought the character work was superb, and I thought it was very, I wouldn't say morally ambiguous, but real, just very human. Especially like, I mean, you think back to Rodrigo's decision where he just shows at the end that he's just still loyal to what he's been loyal to his whole life. And it's in a loyal way. It's not in like an Abercrombie way where, Abercrombie's just cynical where no one's going to grow.
I love him.
It's a way that maybe, I love him too. But maybe it's just a way that, yes, he's grown as a person, and he's, had become best friends maybe with an Asherite, but he still has this deep-seated loyalty to his people and his king, and that's where he's always going to go, and that's where he was always going to go from the start. So
even with his wife, he's loyal to her, despite the fact that he falls in love with Jahane. I loved the subtle, I don't know if it's a love triangle, but the subtle relationship there, the romantic
I
tensions
love that.
there.
I love that it
Love that.
wasn't a love triangle.
Yeah.
Did you
Yeah.
fall
They
in
both,
love
even
with
though they
her?
both loved her, I loved that it really wasn't a love triangle. It
I
was
just
a
like the
little
part
different.
where Miranda tells Rodrigo, remember, like, if you sleep with another woman, I'll either kill you or sleep with another man. And I don't want to sleep with another man, so you best watch out.
Yeah.
Did you all think that Rodrigo loved Jahane? Because that was not something I thought.
Yeah.
I thought it was more like an admiration rather than being in love with her. I feel like he's so in love with his wife.
Yeah, I
that
think he
it's
was like
not in
infatuated
love.
with like
Yeah,
Jahane
I
and
think
really
it's like
liked
a
Jahane.
like a admiration, infatuation thing. But if you were to sit back and really think about it, like Miranda is so far ahead for him than Jahane would be. Like Alvar is in love with Jahane.
Yeah.
Like, that like innocent puppy love where you're like, oh, you
Yeah.
poor thing. But I viewed
think-
that more as the love triangle where it was
Oh, yeah.
Alvar, Karen, and Jahane, as opposed to the Belmontes kind of like adjacent to them.
I think they all love Jahane.
Yeah, I mean,
No,
apparently
they
she's
did.
the one to
I
be.
love Jahane, so they
I
all
loved
love
her.
Jahane.
So I think you're right, Laura. I think it's a different kind of love. I think
Yeah.
I think that I guess the way I interpreted it was that Rodrigo, I think there was some chemistry there. I think there was definitely some sexual chemistry between Jahane and Rodrigo.
There definitely was.
But and there was genuine love. Like we love each other like dear, dear, dear friends.
Mhm.
But it's not the same, validating your point, as the love and passion he has for Miranda. Miranda was going to be his one true love always. It was going to, I think it's kind of like what Josh was saying about he was always going to be true to what he was going to be true to at the end of the day, even though he could open his heart to other things in life. And I just like the open-heartedness of this book is what got to me. And I
But
think
that's
that
character work.
Jahane
It's so
just,
good.
and I think Jahane felt the same way. I think it was reciprocal with the way she felt about Rodrigo. I think there was there was some chemistry and there was deep love and admiration and respect. But Amar Kairan was always going to be her love. It was always going to be him. So I think and I think that there wasn't even any jealousy or insecurity about that between Kairan and Rodrigo. Like I don't even think there was insecurity about it between
No,
those
I
two.
mean, you have the scene where she and Rodrigo meet, and on the horse, there's kind of that
Mhm.
like rousing, which was a really funny scene. But the scene that they depart from each other at the end of the book, I'm paraphrasing, but it basically says something along the lines of anything that had been between them was now kind of put to rest. And you're like, there is something there, but it's just not the same, or at least it wasn't for me. But yeah, I mean, the whole time I just felt bad for Alvar because I was like, buddy, it's not happening.
Maybe if his stirrups were a little higher.
Yeah,
would've
exactly.
impressed
It's set up from the very beginning that it's going to be Amar. Like, from their first interaction, you're like, end game, the two of them, like 100%, that's what's going to be. So it was funny to watch that kind of develop and see from poor Alvar's like third wheel perspective. But that was something I loved too, because it felt so reminiscent of like your first crush and that like infatuation and puppy love and like being around somebody and how like you feel when you're around them. I was like, that's like being 16, and that was really cool to experience almost again through a character. I really liked that.
Did anybody catch, because I didn't catch this until I finished the book and then went back and I reread a little bit of the first chapter. I do that nowadays if it's a book I really love, because I always find that there are things that I have a new context for. Did anybody catch that it was her mentor, who she slept with, by the way? They said that at the beginning that she slept with her mentor. It was his daughter that Alvar ended up with.
No, I didn't catch that.
Isn't that
Wow,
crazy?
twice, and I still didn't catch it.
Yes.
And it makes perfect sense.
Because I read that and I'm like, I feel like I should know that name when she mentioned the name of how, because that's, how it says in the end, how he marries the daughter of a doctor.
Yeah,
and
she's
how
in the
his
profession.
wife is a doctor and her father is this famous doctor. And you're thinking the whole time you're reading that, like, oh, it's Jahane. It's Jahane. Jahane has the famous doctor father. there's another famous doctor. He's mentioned at the beginning of the book, and that was Jahane's mentor.
That's
Did not
awesome. Great
catch
catch. I totally missed
Wow,
that.
I totally missed that.
Agreed,
Crazy.
Mac. He has a type.
Yeah, right.
Not
That's why he's now
interested if you're
Kindath
not the
too.
daughter
Yeah.
of a famous doctor, frankly.
Yeah.
Yep. Kindath, daughter of doctor.
Yeah.
You know who we
Yeah.
haven't talked about? The duo in Ragosa, like King Badir and Mazur, who I really like, and I thought the ending of that
Yes.
was really heartbreaking, and it was
Yeah.
combined with all the like the book kind of has like 3 climactic ending. Like it has the scene where Velaz dies. Press F for Velaz.
Oh,
He's
yeah.
the Missy
A
Julie.
lot.
That
Oh,
hurt.
Yeah.
So heartbreaking.
And then the Diego like getting healed. And then obviously the duel at the end. But I absolutely love it where like Mazur sends the letter against the king's will to, I forget his name, in the desert, and you see like him reading it, and it's such a good letter, like it's so convincing, and you're like, oh, maybe he's gonna let them go, and he agrees, but he's just like, it shall be as it was written, and it's just like, like I still remember that line. That is not a paraphrase, that is a quote, because I
That is
remember
quote,
it.
yeah.
Because
I read
I
it
was
today.
like, it was such a good letter. I was like, see, he's gotten to him. He's gonna let him go, and then the guy's like, okay, we'll spare the city, but yeah, you're gonna come out and we're gonna kill you.
Oh,
And
that was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Yes, that was so good. That was so good. And those characters were excellent too, by the
Yeah.
way.
I love those
Every
two. Yeah,
perspective. Yeah.
they totally like. This is what I say. A bunch of like GGK books. This is what I am talking about is character work, and I do. I feel like everyone could be the protagonist. Like I feel like I know
Yeah.
everyone. Like King Badur and like his advisor. I just looked at his name and I forgot it because I'm bad at names. They totally like. I feel like
Is that
they're
Ben
the type of
Audrey?
people who could be the protagonist. Like there could be a book about them.
They were
Almost
great. Yeah.
Every character I feel like could have a book that's like first person about them, and it's like they have enough story and stuff going on that it would be good.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. I could have even had a whole separate story about the Belmontes,
Oh yeah.
and I really
Their
enjoyed
ranch.
this. Yes, and their ranch. And I even enjoyed the stories about, is it King Ramiro and his wife when his wife
Inez. I
Yeah.
loved that
Inez,
story
yeah.
too. Yeah.
I enjoyed that. And with that other doctor who comes in and identifies that the arrow was poisoned. I really enjoyed those parts of the story.
That's
as
that's the
well.
one example. That's the main one where I remember because like the description of the hunt is like third person omniscient, and it's like and then like when she's poisoned, it's like super deep, like inner perspective, and I'm like, oh, you're just doing whatever you want here, but whatever. I respect
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So
I
that
liked
was
it.
really well based in history, and a lot of people might not have realized that when the Moors conquered Spain, their doctors were nowhere near as equipped as Jewish doctors were. So a lot of Jewish doctors actually were hired by the Moorish kings and worked in their courts for them. Like they didn't even have Moorish doctors. So his character saying that he learned how to do those things from the Kindath texts, I was like, this is really well done and like subtly put into the story, because it's all these little historical tidbits and anomalies that he's kind of just putting in. And I was like, oh, it's so good. Like, I just love that whole theme. But I also really loved the dynamic between the king and Inez, because Inez is really our like zealoty character, I feel like. So it was very interesting to see the contrast of a marriage and a marriage bed between the two of them versus Miranda and Rodrigo. I was like, we're kind of going both ends of the spectrum with these two. And I really liked how he handled that relationship. I thought it was very interesting.
I think if
Yeah.
you say one thing for Guy Gavriel, it's that he does his research.
Yeah,
Totally.
so good.
There's a reason he doesn't pump out novels quickly, and that's because each novel requires like at least a year of dedicated research. And
I mean, you can see that. I mean, like, honestly, it's one of those things that it's like writing a dissertation. It's doing so much research and then putting your own spin on it. Like, as I was reading this, I kept wondering if he was going to follow history or we were going to get an alternative ending to history. I was like,
I'll be really interested to see your reaction to some, because some of them, like the actual situation is even more based on like history.
yeah.
And there's always a mix of like characters who are inspired by real people and characters who are his own creation. It'll be interesting to see. Is there any like periods of time that like are your favorite that you like reading about? There might be a Guy Gavriel book for it.
Well, ancient Rome is my, like, that's what I wrote my thesis
I
on,
wanted to
so
do
that
ancient
tends
Rome.
to be my thing, but, I'm pretty partial to Italy in general because
Yeah.
of that,
Well,
which I
GGK
know,
likes
like
Italy as well,
he
so
does, yeah, so I know that that's a thing.
I
My
want
husband
to do
just read
ancient.
one of them, I think that takes place in, like, Anglo-Saxon Britain, like that
Last Light of
equivalent.
the Sun. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love that time period too because I have Viking ancestry. That's a big part of my DNA, so I'm biased to liking that type of thing. But I am curious to read more of his stuff and see how this world connects and all the other
I
historical
want him to do an
experiences.
ancient Rome book so much. Like, if I want one thing, it's a Crisis of the Third Century GGK book. I would. That's what
Like
I want him.
Constantine, 3rd century?
No, like Aurelian.
Oh, okay. Oh,
Anyway,
yes.
story non ancient Rome people, but that's what I want in my
You
life.
could do all the Visigoths and all that.
Yeah. Anyway.
Sorry, we digress.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think if there's anything else to say about this book. Did we
Well,
miss
there's
How did you
so
anything?
much to
feel?
say. Like, it's one of the novels where I feel like you could do like a podcast where like each hour-long podcast was on a
Probably.
chapter, and you
Yeah.
still have plenty to talk about for each chapter. Like,
I'm genuinely
Yeah.
curious what the feeling was that all of you were left with when you
Mm.
finished it, because for me it was like elation and despair simultaneously.
happy
So,
sad. Someone
yeah,
jokingly on Discord was like, there
Yeah.
needs to be like a new emotion for GGK, like happy sad. And I'm like,
yeah,
that's
that's
Yeah.
basically
not
how I
exactly
felt.
eloquent, but
But that's but I love happy sad. Like even
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings kind of gives that, you know.
I think the best works of
feeling.
literature, there's always a touch of melancholy.
Mhm.
And that's how I felt with this. I felt overall very happy with the whole journey and where it ended, but there was some melancholy at the end.
it's actually like, if you asked me to, when people use like catharsis to describe the end of a book, if you had to just like get me to be like, what chapter is like, what's the emotion for you that's like that catharsis is describing? It's the last chapter of this book is like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the last chapter or the epilogue?
well, both combined, but especially the
Sure.
last chapter, like the
Okay.
duel.
Angie, you should totally read this book. It is so
Yeah.
good. I think you would love it. I know you would love it.
And also, GGK is a curse. Once he was like, a genie came down and he was like, I want to be a really good author. And the genie was like, okay, but people will read one of your books and really love them and not read another for 15 years. And you need to help GGK break the curse, okay?
Yeah. It's such a brilliant book. I felt I felt like there was like a bittersweet melancholy feeling. Um there's just like this sense of lingering that see my favorite endings have this quality and I can't put my finger on it. I can't articulate it very well. But my favorite books seem to have this feeling of like I'm just suspended in air. It's kind of like beautiful music. Josh, you know what I'm talking
Yeah.
about. Like you listen to a
Yeah.
beautiful piece of music and you just feel like, like like you're just suspended. And that's how I felt. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. I really had the biggest book hangover when I finished this book. And I felt kind of sad that it was over. But at the same time, I thought the ending was just so perfect. There was something poetic about it. And yeah, I think like what you were saying, Josh, at the beginning of the discussion, just the way that he closed things, it really was masterful. It didn't linger too long, but it felt like he just brought it to a close at the perfect time.
He's good
Is
at it.
everyone happy that Rodrigo lost, or would you have preferred that
I'm
Rodrigo
not
won?
happy about either outcome.
I know,
Okay?
they both suck. It's so terrible.
That's the
The
point.
bittersweet part of it.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so
But
terrible. I did think in my heart of hearts, I was like, I want Rodrigo to win because I was more invested in the Miranda and Rodrigo relationship. But that for me in itself is a feat of GGK that I'm wanting someone to live because of their romance. So, that is such a win in his category.
For some reason, I was expecting Rodriguez to win for some reason.
me too.
Like, I was
Me
like,
too.
Rodriguez is the better fight. I feel like I was just like, I feel like Rodriguez is the better fighter. Like, I was just like,
Yes.
I feel like he's gonna win. But I didn't want either of them to die. I was like,
Yeah.
are you gonna do the thing where like they both die? No, okay, good. You're not gonna do only one of them. I mean, I think part
Go
of the,
ahead.
like there's a line in this book like they were like a bright golden coin, those two, like two sides,
Mhm.
same
Two sides
like
of the
different
same
pictures
coin.
on each, same value.
Mhm.
And like for talking about them individually as characters, I find it hard because they're clearly like have so many similarities, and their differences are like a lot of their differences are just like aesthetic and like where they come from culture wise. And one of the things I like so much about like them being silhouettes dueling is that finally makes them like you realize they're like the same, like
The
they're
same.
equivalent. Even now aesthetically, like they look the same and they are mirrors of each other.
That was such a powerful scene, and so Laura, you talked earlier about imagery and setting, and I totally agree. That is my reading taste. I like to feel immersed in a book, and at
Mhm.
the same time, it's not too weighty with description, as you mentioned. Like, it's just perfect. It's like the perfect balance. But
Yeah.
that scene, I feel like I could just see it cinematically in my mind.
100%. It would be such a like visual masterpiece, I feel like, if it was adapted correctly.
Mhm.
But the last thing I'm gonna say in terms of plot, I love that in the epilogue you see that Miranda and Jahane have stayed friends. Like that to
Mhm.
me was so touching. Because of the surgery with their son and everything else. Like it just to me, it showed that that relationship between the two men was so prevalent and important, and that carried through with the other people. I really thought that that was a
And that,
beautiful
like they understood the respect that like the duel wasn't
exactly.
out of vehement, but out of like duty and was unavoidable without
Yes.
them changing who they were. Yeah, it's a
There
good
Yeah.
point.
was
I
a
hadn't thought that
depth.
was so good.
I think that was part of the sophistication of this story was there was a depth of knowing in the characters, and you trusted that depth of knowing as a reader. And so I just that was just so perfectly handled. I really what did you all think really quickly about the magical surgery? Josh, I haven't heard from you in a while. What did you think of the magical surgery?
I mean, we had to have magic somewhere, right? No, it was okay, I guess. I mean, it served a purpose to show, you had the Kindath doctor, and he's, Jahane's father. He's kind of the I don't know, kind of the bridge between the Jadites at that point, because they start to see that, these people are okay, because not all the people on that side of the skirmish were necessarily, had grown like the rest of our kind of little fellowship of Rodrigo's men. So, I mean, it served a purpose, but yeah, I think it was so minor. It didn't really stick with me as much as so many other things that I thought about in this book.
Yeah. And Rodrigo's son being able to psychically see where
That's
people
I think the
are.
surgery is kind of I'm not sure if it was directly like magic or not. Like that's kind of but I think the
Well,
only like overtly magic thing is like
Mm.
Diego's ability to
Also, just the clairvoyance. Yeah.
yeah,
That's what
yeah.
I got too, that the surgery itself was
was
just
just mastery.
his
Yeah.
skill. Yeah,
Well,
but the magic was Diego.
well, I mean, yeah, I mean, in the world that the surgery was not considered magic. It was like, this is science, this is
Right.
surgery, this is medicine. That was the way it was
Yeah.
kind of explained in the narrative. At the same time, you have fantasy books where magic is considered part of the world.
Science and
And
part
As
of the
you
world.
know,
And he
the
had a crushed skull too. So
yeah. And a lot of the time, like, so GGK plays with like people not it being unclear whether things are magic or not. Because so this is one of the things he's talked about, and I'm like, oh, I actually the more I reread, I'm like, this is actually the first time I was like, I don't know how much this accomplishes, and now I'm like, no, this is really effective. And it's a lot of time he will take things that are perceived as like supernatural by the people at the time, and he'll just like make them correct. And the point of this is a lot of time, like when people are reading from historical perspectives, modern audience can be a bit smug, like, oh, how could these people
totally.
think this is magic? These idiots. It's like, okay, you know it isn't magic. But a lot of the time, like, you're just as in the dark of whether it's magic as the characters are. And it's kind of like, hey, now that you don't know whether it is or not, it's kind of hard to tell whether it's magic or not, isn't it?
Yeah,
And it
100%.
kind of just brings you closer to who the characters, because it removes like the smugness you have. And
We
kind of
have a
makes those things issue.
terrible, I think, there could be a terrible modern bias to look back at people in history as being less intelligent than we are, which was totally not the case. And yet, I think that you're absolutely right. I actually saw an interview right before this discussion. I was just looking online for GGK stuff, and I found him talking about that, like why he likes to do historical fiction, but just make the magic element, the little bit of magic element real in the world to make you understand the perspectives.
Sometimes I wish he did higher magic stuff, because I know like this is the only GGK book you guys have read, so you don't know this, but like when his magic stuff's really good. Like his scenes that are more overtly fantastical, like they almost always rule. So, but
I'm so excited to read more of his books. I'm going to go ahead and read a couple of the comments here. First with Eric. Eric, it sounds like Eric was not as big a fan of the ending, which is fine. We could all have different opinions about that. For me, I thought it was perfect. Like Jeff's kiss, just like Kevin says here.
I mean, I agree it was strange. Like it's
maybe,
unique, but for me, it just worked fantastic.
I liked it though. I mean, we obviously have a significant time jump. Like the Reconquista is like a 600-year event. So we see that this is kind of, it seems like at the end of that time period. And I mean, I think it's appropriate to see what his sons go on to do and what these other characters do. I thought the last line was a little strange about like the cups or whatever. And I was like, okay.
It's a toast. It's 3 cups. Like it's a toast to the 3 religions.
Yeah, like it's a toast to the 3. But I was like, that's fine. Like I felt that compared to all his other prose in the book, that it was maybe a little lackluster as a final line, but as an ending overall, I really liked the ending.
Yeah, it doesn't quite have the same pizzazz as no sun, no moon, no stars over AL-RASSAN.
Yeah.
There was a poem though where he talks about the river and talks about wine, and it felt like there was some symbolism in it that I wonder if this was tied to. And there's a lot. I mean, there was already a lot talked about the water and what water meant to the Asherites, especially the people of the desert, how profound it was, how sacred it was. But then there was also mention of the wine, and the first night that they meet in Ragosa, was it Ragosa? Or I'm trying to remember what location they were in. Where they all meet up outside of Hosanna. And I think that I think it's Ragosa, where they bond over wine. And so there was something about their connection through that. And then it kind of was, I want to say there was also a connection with blood. I don't know. I did feel like there were some things that maybe that were there that I was kind of grasping at, but I could be wrong and I could be pulling at straws with that. But
I'm definitely going to reread this book. I think I'll probably try to do it next year, maybe give myself some time and maybe read some GGK in between now and then. But I have a feeling it's one of those things that you just keep picking up more with each read.
I've found that I've reread a few of them now, and I've definitely picked up a lot.
I would definitely say that's the case with this book. I think that there's a lot there to unpack, a lot that rewards close reading.
The problem is when you read more GGK, then I'm like, now I also want to reread those.
Rodrigo is based on historical figure of Rodrigo.
El Cid.
Yeah. El Cid. I think it's El Cid. I could be wrong.
I'm probably wrong. I don't know how to pronounce things.
That's okay. He was considered by many to be the greatest knight in medieval history. Yeah, he has quite the history indeed. And he is still celebrated Spanish folk hero. Absolutely. There are like incredible monuments and statues of this character. And you really, I don't know. I mean, I would be curious how closely, I mean, there's obviously real parallels with what happens in this story and this character for sure. So fantastic characters all around. Excellent humor, excellent prose. I liked the poetry that was interspersed. Did you all like the poetry?
I did.
I actually did, and I normally don't care about poetry. This was one where I was like, I actually like the poetry. What's going on? Not all. Yeah. Some of it I was just kind of like, cool poetry. But I know
Joanna has read Augustus. Have either of you read Augustus?
I have read Augustus.
Okay.
It's brilliant.
So this book read similar in that to me, in that it felt like a love letter to historical
Can someone please clip this and send it to Alan? Thank you.
Yeah, just because it's so well researched, and Augustus is one of the other historical fiction books that I feel like gives such a powerful voice to these people that were so prominent and so well respected that we still talk about them so long after they lived, that it just is such a genuine admiration that I have for him because of how well he voices these people. Like we were kind of saying, I think you were mentioning that that's why he didn't want to write about like real Spain, because you're then equating it to like an actual person. But he is still sort of doing that, but in this way, I feel like it really is his personal love letter to these people by giving them the voices that he gave them. And to me, it was very similar to reading Augustus with how he gave those voices to these historical figures in his way. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And there's also a theme of poetry in Augustus as well. So,
yeah.
I need to read Augustus now.
oh,
so
you've
good.
got to read Augustus,
So
Josh.
good.
You would
10 out of
love
10.
it.
Loved it.
There's no way you would not love it. That's definitely one of the best historical fiction books I've ever
Yeah.
read. It's so good.
It's my top
Absolutely
one.
brilliant. Yeah. Yeah. So, but back to Lions of AL-RASSAN. Any closing thoughts? We've been talking for almost an hour and 45 minutes. So I
I'm
just
sure
want
I
to.
will something I want to say in half an hour. But
I will just say, Jake, I will not be one of those readers that takes 15 years off. I think he's an author, just one book in, that could be an all-timer for me based on this one. I already have Tigana and Song for Arbonne on the shelf, so I'm ready to fire those up whenever. But he's one that I think I'm adding everything to the TBR. I think I'll read those two, and then I'll just read chronologically after that, which I think you mentioned in your reading advice video.
You can, I mean, there's a lot of valid reading orders. There's only a couple where it really matters.
But publication is usually
a
safe choice. So
yeah.
But no, I was blown away. Like I mentioned at the beginning, he did absolutely everything that I value as a reader at about as high level as you can get. Character, setting, world building, prose. Love the prose. So yeah, I'm definitely a fan. I'll be reading more.
Well, we can read them together if we want.
I'm in.
Sure.
Some of them I've already read twice, and basically all the others I want to reread. So
Great. Any closing thoughts, Jake?
I'm very happy that you all enjoyed it, and that I was invited on here. I read this book almost 2 years ago now, nearly exactly 2 years ago now, and I've been waiting. No one's had any of these damn live shows. I've been trying to get people to read it, and I appreciate you all. And I would just like to express that appreciation.
Well, I'm so grateful that you recommended this book to me. It might be one of the best books I've ever been. Well, I wasn't personally recommended, but I did just take your advice off your video. But it was
you were very easy to recommend. Some people, it's like, I think you'd like this Guy Gavriel book, but not this. But I don't know Laura's taste in books that well. But some people, and you were one of them, Johanna, and you're one of them, Josh. I'm just like, yeah, you'll probably like any of them. So might as well start with Lions.
Yeah.
In the back of my head, that wasn't the bit, but it's kind of like I was pretty sure probably it would have been hard for you.
Absolutely. So I'm so grateful to you with your advice on reading order. And I know we've mentioned Bridger from the Library Ladder, also an incredible channel, and also has some incredible GGK content. And he considered this as #1, didn't he?
It was this or Arbonne. I think he said when he first read this, it was his favorite, and then he reread Arbonne, and he was like, "No, Arbonne's my favorite," and he's like, "But I haven't reread AL-RASSAN yet." So
that's what it was. Yeah. Well, Arbonne is going to be my next one, and I'm very excited about it. After watching Jimmy's review of that book, he's convinced me. He actually reached out to me while he was reading it and convinced me that I would absolutely love the book.
You will.
And it has troubadours, so that makes me so excited. So for the musicians, I think that's going to be exciting. I'm really excited about that, though. And so I'm just really, really grateful to have read this book. And I'm so grateful to have had this discussion with you three. I really appreciated all three of your insights, as well as everyone in the chat. Laura, any last thoughts? I really appreciated hearing everything you had to say. And it was such a pleasure to have you on the channel finally. So
very nice to meet you, Laura, by the way. I've talked to you two before in live.
Yes. Well, thank you for having me. Honestly, it was just a really enjoyable experience. I have done this thing this year where I've gone in blind to all of my reads. Because I'm definitely that person that reads a back cover and I'm like, nope, and put it back without giving it a second thought. And I've been trying to be more open. I don't know if I would have picked this up for myself had I read the back cover, in all honesty. And I'm really happy that it just kind of came into my life in the way that it did. And yeah, it's a book that's going to stick with me, I think, for a really long time. I think it'll probably end up being in my top 3 books for the year. So I'm curious to revisit it probably next year and see all the little things that I didn't pick up on the first time and really start to immerse myself in his universe because I do love that. I love when authors kind of connect their books in ways like that. So I
They're
am
very
definitely
vaguely connected, I will say.
sorry.
They're very vaguely connected, and
Which is
some of
great.
them
Like,
are.
I love that. So for me, like, I think he's such a brilliant mind, someone that, like I said, it feels like a dissertation, but not like the heftiness of a dissertation. It's just a really beautiful historical love letter for me.
Mhm.
So it was a pleasure to read it. And I feel honored to have read this book because of how he writes. It's a privilege to read.
Yes,
Did you
and
see
shout
Max
out to oh, sorry, go ahead. What?
Max reading Brightness soon, and A Brightness Long Ago is my favorite standalone novel. So I'm
Ah.
in favor of that. And I stand by my comment. I replied to Johanna on Jimmy's review. I will eat my copy of A Song for Our Bone if you dislike it.
I'm certain I'm going to love it. I'm
Yes.
certain I'm going
But
to
also,
love it.
if you don't, could you please lie? I don't actually want to eat my copy.
That'd be kind of funny if you did eat it. But shout out to Laura's husband too, who also convinced her to read
right.
this. And thank you to everyone in the chat. I'm going to read this last comment here. The Last Light of the Sun is based on Alfred the Great and the Viking raids.
Yeah, this is
And
the
it's
one that my husband
underrated.
just read.
Yeah, it's
Same.
underrated. It's the one that for some reason a bunch of like GGK fans are like, it's his worst book. And I read it and I'm very confused as to why, because it's great.
Husband liked it too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I approve of your husband's taste in books. I've never met
Yes.
him, but everything I've heard has been great. So
Maybe one time I'll have him on my channel and we can
Yes. Let's do. I love it when spouses are on people's
some
channels.
random 24-year-old kid from Canada approves.
I'm from Canada too, so it's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
Canadians unite. We're working
Yeah.
to it.
That's
We're
right.
conquering BookTube, one live discussion at a time.
Fantastic. Well, we are going to go ahead and end it here. But again, thank you to my guests. All their channels are linked in the description below. So please make sure you're subscribed to all three of these channels because they are fantastic. And thank you again to everybody in the chat, everybody who's watching this live show live or who's watching the replay. We welcome your thoughts in the comment section if you're watching the replay. And thank you so much for watching. Have a great rest of
Thank you so much for having me on.
evening.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Chat. Thank you, chat. You're
Yes,
great as
thank
well.
you.